After e4, c5, knight c3, white is playing close Sicilian. The idea is to play the Grand Prix. That's what we're going through in this video. What I suggest to play here is a6. This move is played for several reasons. It stops the bishop and the knight from going to b5 eventually. It prepares the bishop to go to fianchetto on b7. It allows an attack on the queen side with potential b4 and misplacing of the white knight. And also, it is one of the best moves to play, a6, one of the strongest. So after f4, the Grand Prix idea, black continues with e6. So now white will have to play the logical Grand Prix moves. Well, this move is already not possible. Bishop b5 is already not happening because it's one of the lines of the Grand Prix. It could happen in the Grand Prix, and this move of a6 pawn is already preventing one of the lines from happening. So white will have to play the logical knight f3 and then development of the pieces and then castling and so on. So the idea of the white player, as you all know, to play the f pawn is to then eventually push the f pawn and get a rook on an open file as soon as the white player will castle. So after knight f3, b5. Black is going like this. We have nothing to worry. I know we're pushing a lot of pawns, we're not developing pieces, but the white player doesn't have any clear attack on our king yet, so we don't have to worry. So now white can continue in several ways. Best would be d4, logical move as the white player against the Sicilian. The idea is that after the trade that will happen, and knight takes back. The queen could also take back. We're going to look at what happens afterwards. Knight takes back. And so the white player has two knights developed and 2 pawns in the center. Black continues with bishop to b7. So this is the setup I suggest to play against the Grand Prix. We are putting pressure on the square e4. And we're already threatening b4, misplacing the knight. The knight will move away. We can win a pawn with no compensation whatsoever. And so this is now inducing the white player to either push the pawn to e5, which is not good because then this bishop is really strong, and also stopping the development of the light square bishop, otherwise we're going all in. Or this move is also preparing simply the bishop to developing to d3, which is the best move. So bishop d3 is protecting the pawn, and also it's kind of the only place we can put the bishop. You can't play the bishop to c4, and then in e2 the bishop isn't as effective. Although bishop e2, it is a possibility, and we're going to explore that eventually. So now black continues with knight f6, increasing the attack over the square e4, and now black's best move, if black were to play again, would be b4. So black is still threatening b4, removing the knight, and then bishop takes e4. After a swap, if knight e4, the knight will be sitting amazingly there. If not, we're just going to leave things like that, keeping the pressure on g2. Our position is better. So white's best move is a3, obviously, to stop that. And now black continues with queen b6. Black already has an edge. With attacking this knight, we're threatening to just play moves like bishop c5, knight c6, increasing the pressure on that diagonal, and this diagonal is going to be amazing to attack. The good thing is we know that the white player will have to castle short side. If white castle long side, it's a suicide because we're going to have a rook on an open file, and we've already started pushing pawns. What can white do? Either the knight undevelops or the bishop undevelops. In such case, then we're going to look at what happens in the next lines. Or simply white can continue developing, and the only move will be bishop e3. There's no other move. And by the way, there are no weird sacrifices like idea knight f5, you can just take it. So there's no sacrifices available for white. So after bishop e3, which we're going to start looking at, we're going to increase pressure on the d4 square. So now we have two pieces attacking over this diagonal, and we want to take the knight. The best move by white is to play knight c to e2. That's the engine's choice in order to not undevelop the bishop. And eventually that also prepares c3. How to continue now? Queen a7. Not knight c6 because that just allows a bunch of swaps. Queen a7, good thing is it prepares a potential bishop to b6. That's the reason. It depends though. So now let's look at what happens after the very logical castle. The white player will try to castle and go on with development. We castle too. Castle, castle. So now white continues. Let's have a look at a few options. White cannot play this typical f5 move with the idea of swapping the pawns and having a rook attacking on the king side simply because of knight g4, which wins the game. We're attacking the bishop, and if the bishop retreats, so if the bishop retreats, we can take the bishop. We can take the bishop, and then we will have two pieces attacking this knight. If the rook protects the bishop, then again we can just take, and then rook takes, and the bishop and the queen will be attacking two pieces. So the two pieces attacking d4, and of course the bishop can't move away because we have too many pieces attacking d4. So f5 is not possible. Best move is king h1. Afterward, we're gonna play bishop takes e4. So we're going for that pawn. That's a free pawn that black won. There's no compensation for white. If white tries b4, for example, our best move is to take the bishop in d3. And after queen takes back, only way to take back, because taking back with the pawn will isolate the pawn, and that's just really bad. Queen d3. The bishop just goes back to b6 now, and black has a favorable endgame. The idea is simply to play knight to c6 and favor all the swaps. So let's make a recap. So after knight c3, a6, f4, and then e6. Knight f3, we push the pawn. So this is very easy to remember. After d4 and a swap of pawns, we can develop the bishop in fianchetto. And after bishop to d3, in this line that we're looking at, knight f6, we're going for putting pressure and threatening b4. a3 is the best move, and now we play queen to b6. The logical move to defend the knight, unless the white player doesn't want to retreat the knight, but that will make the white player unable to castle. After bishop e3 and bishop c5, and the knight goes back to e2, which is the best move to defend the knight a little bit further. Black continues with queen a7, as we mentioned before. Now white can try c3 instead of castling, as we said before. That also loses, simply because this is a fine pawn to take. It's a free pawn, completely for free. So c3 is wrong. e5 is another idea that we need to mention, but this is met by knight to g4, attacking the bishop, and now the bishop can't really go to f2 because we can take, and then we have double attack on d4, and the bishop shouldn't really go back because we still have double attack on d4. So the best move, only move, will be queen to d2. But now we play knight to c6, and we have 3 attackers over d4, and white only has 2 defenders, so he has to do something about that. Nothing can be done by moving this knight away, because then black has attack on this bishop, or if the knight goes to f5, for example, then the f5 is just not a safe square, and we don't have to worry about bishop because it's defended. So after c3, logical move, black plays knight to a5. The idea is to play knight to b3, and now black prepares a queenside attack. Knight to b3 forks the queen and rook, and it forces white to play passively. Also, because if the knight were to infiltrate on b3, the queen couldn't really stay on this diagonal, and we will take the bishop. So knight c1 is the best move according to the engine, obviously. But black now goes on with knight c4. This couldn't be stopped. And we're forking these two, meaning that the white player's only move is to take the knight. And so after the bishop takes the knight, black continues with knight takes bishop. Now there's 2 options, either queen takes or bishop retreats, for example. Well, bishop d3 would be met by bishop takes knight. So after pawn takes and queen takes, then this is just a free pawn. So after queen takes knight, we take back the bishop, obviously. And after castling, best move by black is bishop to d5. Black has the bishop pair and rook that can easily go to open file, like in the b8 file, like from the b8 square. White now is also seriously under pressure because the knight in d4 is. So after knight c to e2, which is the best move in order to be able to move the queen away without too much problem, black continues with rook to b8. Position is just much better, and we're going for the b2 pawn. This cannot be defended through queen d2 because of queen to b7. It's going to be too much pressure, and also what this move does is put pressure on g2. So we're going to take the pawn in g2. So in case of rook b1, g2 is not guarded. And so queen d2 is wrong, it just loses more. So after rook a to b1, black continues with g6, preventing the f5 idea. Best move by white now, because white is in some sort of zugzwang, can't really do much. h3 is the best move. Ideas to push g4 and f5 are just completely crazy. Black now continues with the inevitable rook to b6, and the idea to play queen to b7 and go for the pawn in d2. After rook to b6, this is just a winning endgame. If white plays knight to g3, which right now happens to be the best move in order to allow the rook to be effective to defend the second rank, queen to b7 and rook to f2, or even queen to d2 instead of rook to f2, these moves are all met by bishop to a3. And needless to say that the b3 pawn was never possible up to this point, because we just had our crucial bishop d5 move and the pawn in c4. So one more recap, we're going to go through one more line. After a6, f4, e6, knight f3, and now we push the pawn. So we've got this triple pawn attack. So after pawn takes, sometimes white can play with the queen. This is actually pretty popular, and it's a slightly different setup. The knight is still in f3, guarding d4. White will not go through all of these many pains as we saw before. So how do we deal with this? With bishop to b7, obvious move, and after bishop to d3, black continues with queen to c7. Now, white has to develop. Bishop d2 is not good. Bishop e3 is much better. There could be setups with bishop to d2. Yeah, we might consider this in the future, but bishop e3 is the move we're going to look at now. Needless to say, b3 makes serious problems over the dark squares on this side, on the queen side, and also there will be problems on this diagonal. Queen c7, also pointless to mention that the white player cannot castle because bishop c5 is pinning the queen to the king. So after bishop e3, logical move. Black continues with knight f6, and black has the future goal of playing d6 in this position, and eventually knight b to d7 and e5. That would be the ideal setup. Of course, we don't get to play too many moves in a row. So after knight f6 and white castles, black continues with knight to g4, attacking the bishop, and of course the bishop can't leave the diagonal because of bishop c5. So this move makes the bishop go to f2. So that's a serious problem. What happens now is knight takes, and rook takes is met by bishop c5, winning the game. Yeah, it's not a problem if the queen takes in g7 because we're still pinning this rook. This rook can just move away. There's no compensation for white. So after, if instead white takes with the queen, then knight takes bishop and queen takes, then we can play bishop c5. Only move now is knight to d4 in order to save the queen. And now black plays d6. The idea is obviously to play e5, exploiting the pin. And queen rook in attacking f7 is not a problem because we're guarding it with the queen. Best move by white is king h1, clearly. Now black continues adding pressure on the knight. Knight to d4. Knight to c6, attacking the knight in d4. And then I can't take the knight since we still have this attack. Best move is knight c to e2, and black continues with e5. White's best move now is to take, and black's best move is to take the knight with the knight. Of course, knight taking in d4 is met by pawn takes, exploiting the pain, and black wins a piece. So white's best move is to take the pawn with an attack on the queen, and now black continues with knight to e2. Our queen is hanging, but so is the white queen. Black is up 2 pieces, so queen takes knight doesn't work because then simply queen takes d6, and black goes on to win the game very easily. So after pawn takes, could be a cheeky attempt, but still, black just takes the queen and will be able to save a piece. Bishop taking e2, best move, is just met by bishop to b6, the pawn is falling. It's an easily won endgame.